Good afternoon, everybody. For those of you all in the United States and for those of you all that are overseas, good evening. I'm Brett Wright. I'm the director of Tigers United University Consortium, and I'm very pleased to bring you the fourth edition of the Road to Vladivostok webinar series. Today, we feature Dr. Eric Dinerstein. He's the former chief scientist of the World Wildlife Fund. Through that, he has led major conservation campaigns for large mammals across the world. He's created plans for the Galapagos, the Chihuahuan Desert, for the Himalayas, and also in Panda, China, and has written numerous books, both scientific and popular. So won't you please welcome today the Director of Biodiversity and Wildlife Solutions, Dr. Eric Dinerstein. Eric?
Thank you. I'm gonna now share my screen. Is that visible?
No.
Okay. Okay, is that visible now?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Sorry for the technical difficulties. That's perfect for a talk about technology. So I'm pleased to be here this afternoon to talk about what we think are some game-changing technologies that can really advance the conservation of tigers and other wildlife in Asia and also better protect the forest habitats they live in. I'm going to be talking about a new AI-based camera alert system to prevent poaching of wildlife in timber and monitor tigers and other large mammals. So let's get started. But first, we're going to go back a few years, back to 1972. And this is our colleague and really the godfather of tiger conservation, Dr. John Seidensticker, posing with a tigress, probably the first ever that was radio collared in Chitwan National Park and in Asia. And it opened up a whole new era of learning a lot more about tigers because we could, for the first time, really monitor their movements and understand much more of their biology. I got to work on that project in 1975 before I transferred over from Chitwan to Bardia. That's me in 1975 in a tree blind, where in an attempt to study tigers using the old standard pug mark technique or a more modern one at that time of taking pictures of tigers and trying to tell them apart by their stripes, it was very inefficient. And I thought, someday, wouldn't it be great if there was an automated way to take pictures of tigers? Well, and also in the 80s, we began extending our work on telemetry from tigers to rhinos as I took over the project after John Seidensticker years later. But we still were using relatively primitive technology. This was before the advent of GPS satellite tracking collars, so early days. The advent of camera traps, that era, began in the 1990s and has become widespread in its use. But even now, we know that a lot of camera trapping is plagued by inefficiencies and other problems. So what I'm going to try to do now for the rest of my talk is give a quick summary of the relevant changes in technology, not only since obviously the early days of tiger conservation monitoring, but even since the Global Tiger Summit back in 2010. And what's really advanced since 2010, its evolution, is first artificial intelligence and models that can detect objects such as humans and wildlife, to be able to run these on miniaturized low-power computer vision chips, to be able to do that inference on the edge versus in the cloud, and then the use of long-range radio modulation and satellite modems, and in a cost-effective way to be able to transmit alert systems. And so all this has happened really in the last 10 years. So how can we harness these advances to better protect tigers and their habitats and monitor this recovery towards T x2? I'd like to suggest that we are on the threshold of a new era, that as we move to the road to Vladivostok, the kind of technology that we'll be using to monitor tigers and their prey, to protect tiger reserves from poaching, is orders of magnitude more sophisticated, more efficient, and cheaper than what we've used in the past. And that's what I'd like to present today. Now, this couldn't come at a more important time because we know that in protected areas that there's limited ranger staffs, and it's unlikely that ranger staffs will grow in size or there'll be more funding available. And the small size of those reserves are inefficient to prevent poaching and human-wildlife conflict before either of them occurs. And so how can we innovate technologies to save nature and prevent environmental crimes? I'd like to suggest the Technologist mantra. This came about when I was at a conference at Google about 6 years ago that was for conservation technology, and a lot of the leading practitioners were there. And attending was a Google engineer who was able to listen to our conversations. He came from Google X. He had no background in conservation, but he was interested in our topic. And after listening to us, he said, "It sounds like everything you're trying to do comes down to solving two problems: battery life and connectivity." And that's our mantra, because if we're going to put field sensors out there, we have to solve those two overarching problems, particularly where places that we know there's no cell service. So here's an illustration of a technology that we have now working in Africa. In fact, the background for where this is taken, this picture, is a place where our cameras are operating now to detect poachers, and I'll show you some of the results of those. This is obviously a schematic, but it gives the idea of what we're trying to do. We have a tiny camera that's placed high above the trail, running artificial intelligence on the chip in the camera that runs the inference very quickly after it's woken up by a motion sensor, loads the AI module, and then runs inference, and then sends that on to a communications unit, and then on to headquarters. And this is the key innovation, is that going from that first detection, what you see in the upper left when intruders are detected, it runs the AI, and here it detects, in this case, this is an actual real-life poacher from Africa detected recently. That image gets sent to the cell network, which then goes to our server, which then goes back to the park staff into a program like Earth Ranger or M-Stripes or any domain awareness system. And all of that happens in 50 seconds. And on your cell phone would be both an alert, a text message like shown on the far left, or the actual image in the middle upper left, in the middle of the screen. So that's magical. This is now possible, and it's happening every day in Africa. We knew that our system worked. We just wanted to keep advancing it. So here's pictures. This is taken recently in an East African reserve in April. We're just covering the faces for confidentiality. But back in 2018, we had the first prototype of our camera system in a park in East Africa where we were using a very primitive form of AI. But here, even then, you can see on the left a person carrying snares in his left hand who is detected and then apprehended. Poachers carrying bushmeat out from the middle of a very large national park. And then these poachers were actually caught because of the alerts sent to headquarters by TrailGuard. And in this very short deployment, we were able to capture 30 poachers representing 20 different poaching gangs and leading to the arrest of intermediaries. We also know that in much tiger habitat in Asia, it's forested. Tigers mostly live in forests now because a lot of the more open areas have been cleared and converted. And so threats to forests are also threats to tigers, opening roads, allowing poacher access, or harvesting timber illegally. In some countries, up to 90% of the timber can be illegally harvested. And so we want to be able to detect illegal logging. So we now have Forest Guard AI that can detect logging trucks coming in before the logs are cut or when they're leaving. And so here you see a use of AI of logging trucks being analyzed by the AI module in the camera and detected with very high levels of probability. So 1.0 is 100% probability. We can also apply these AI models to detect wildlife, and that's what Wildlife's AI does, which we use for tracking the recovery of endangered large mammals and also preventing human-wildlife conflict. One example of the human-wildlife conflict aspect are here, 5 elephants, part of 5 elephants, 3 elephants here, but several others behind it, crossing the Ganga River into croplands from a park. A greater one-horned rhino being detected, tigers, other wild felids, snow leopards, bears, wolves. We have detectors for many species that can run on the edge and detect them. What we use are very different neural network models than you typically might know about. The traditional way to do this is to get thousands and thousands of images of the object, whether it's a tiger or a rhino, elephant that you want to detect, and train a model on those images in hopes that you've generated enough data to be able for the model to particularly detect the species in question. Cividia, a company that we work with, has taken a different approach that's much more cutting edge, using models created from synthetic data. And what they do is think of like Disney or Pixar that hires artists, employs artists to create 3D animations, renditions of the species, and then they take those renditions and then they animate them, they put them in simulators and expose them to different angles, different backgrounds, different light conditions, different objects in front of them, trees, bushes, rocks. And from that, they can generate tens of thousands of permutations very quickly without having to collect a lot of data from pictures, images from camera traps. And when you do that, you come up with an accurate model like this that can detect tigers regardless of the background, the habitat, the angle, the light conditions. It all works very, very well. And so this is what we can run on the edge currently. The reason we've been able to advance this technology is through creative partnerships. So we've worked closely with Intel to get access to their computer vision chips called the Movidius chips lines. We currently use the Movidius Myriad 2, which was state of the art. And now you'll hear in a little bit how we're moving to the next generation, the Myriad X. But this is essentially 14 microprocessors the size of your pinky fingernail that fits inside our camera on the circuit board and is the central nervous system and brains of the operation. The partnership with Cividia also allows us to use state-of-the-art algorithms to detect human intruders, loggers, or key wildlife species. Our connection with Inmarsat, the world's leading satellite company, provides a low-cost solution for satellites as well. And then Emnify provides a SIM card, a universal SIM that allows where GSM coverage is available, we can connect anywhere. So what are the advances that we've made? It comes from miniaturizing cameras, connectivity anywhere, embedded artificial intelligence, long battery life, and reduced cost and increased efficiency. So on the left is a typical traditional trail cam. And we know from studies in the field that up to 10 to 40% of traditional cameras are stolen in the first year. So that's a major constraint, is that as sophisticated as they can be, they do you no good if they get stolen. Unlike these older, bigger cameras, TrailGuard is quite small. We say the size of your index finger. You can see the one on the left of the 3 there in the middle is camouflaged with dried elephant dung on it to make it disappear. And then you can see on the right how invisible the cameras become once they're placed in the vegetation. So this is critical, is to make the cameras really small. And here's a picture of a traditional camera, which works really well in some cases, but is out there in the open and visible. And the beauty of our system is that you can not only hide the camera easily, you can put it way above the ground and still be able to detect wildlife or intruders, because the AI that we run is agnostic to the angle of the camera to the ground. So here's an example of trying to find the TrailGuard in this picture. And I have to be honest, I hadn't looked at this slide for about 6 months when I stuck it in the slideshow. And it took me about 20 minutes to figure out where the camera was, because I'd forgotten where we put it. You wouldn't be the only one if you struggled to find the camera against this commiphora tree. Here's Kenya Wildlife Service, experienced trackers and rangers who have been in their jobs for decades, who know how to track sign, and they couldn't find the camera either. Here's another example. Now, where I'm going to use my mouse, my pointer here, where do you think this camera is hidden? Is it like here in this tangle here, or I first thought it was up here when I saw this picture. That's our communications unit, or maybe here. The answer, oops, is there. I don't know how many of you watching this, from your computers found it, but it would be almost impossible if you didn't know there was a camera and a communications unit in this tree, that it would be there. So next thing though is if we did all that with the AI, we'd end up with just a really smart camera. The other half, if remember from our mantra from the Google engineer, battery life and connectivity, now we have to solve the connectivity part. So we use a Pelican case right off the shelf that holds keys and cell phones and wallets when you're going in places like a kayak or a canoe. That's waterproof, and it holds our GSM version of our communications unit on the upper right, or in the lower left, we use what's called a long-range radio modulation to transmit images where there's no cell connectivity. We can also add another advantage to the system. Imagine how a kangaroo hops. That's how you can transmit the files that create the JPEG that you look at in a camera image. So from the camera, it can go from the transmitter from one comms unit, and it can hop to an adjacent one that could be 6 to 10 kilometers away, and then hop again to a gateway. And that way we can cover much longer distances and get the signal out in places where there's no cell connectivity. So let's briefly review. It's kind of like think of this as a field guide to connectivity for TrailGuard, the camera alert system. So in parks that have very good GSM throughout, we can use either a 2G, 3G, 4G LTE modem to transmit images to the cell tower. And as I said, in about 50 seconds, we can transmit from the camera to our server to your cell phone, and you'll have an alert, or to the headquarters of the park. Now, in India, there's very good cell connectivity in many places. And so we are able to take advantage of that system. But in a lot of other parts of the Tiger Range, that's not a possibility. So let's look in our field guide at some other options. One of them that might be really typical is along the border of the park, where if you want to stop poachers before they kill, if you want to stop them before they enter the park, you should do it on the park boundary. But what if that park boundary has no cell connectivity, but about, say, 5 kilometers away, there might be a village that once you're at that village, you have access to a GSM tower. So we can use the LoRa transmitter to send the packets, the data from the image to a gateway that is in the village, and then that's connected with another antenna pointing at the cell tower, and then you have connectivity. So we extend the range of GSM. Another way of doing this inside a park is, let's say there's tigers moving along a river valley where there's no cell connectivity, but up on that ridge, if you could get there and put like a repeater tower, it could reach the cell network, a GSM tower, and that's what LoRa can do. It can make that hop up to that ridge. It might only be a kilometer, but from there, it gets converted and sent over GSM. A third option, which is not so common in Asia, but is becoming more so in Africa, is where on a ridge, like in the left here, you can see a tower that's a LoRaWAN or a Sigfox or radio tower that has Wi-Fi or Ethernet access at a high point and has internet connectivity and constant power. Where we have that situation, all we have to do is be able to connect, interface with that internet and take advantage of the constant power and just use our simple gateway that receives the data over LoRa to the ridge and then on to the park headquarters via the internet. So that's another possibility. All of these three scenarios I've showed you do not require a satellite modem. So more straightforward, cheaper to deploy. But much of the range of the Tiger will be in places where there is no cell connectivity. The range is too far to a cell tower more than 25 kilometers. There's terrain problems. There's mountain ranges in the way. And so you need a satellite connection to do that. And unfortunately, through the philanthropy of Inmarsat, we have satellite modems that are sold to us at relatively lower cost, and we have incredibly generous airtime charges, so that basically, once you put in the capital costs of a sat modem like the Explorer 540 shown on the left, the running costs of creating a burglar alarm system for a national park would be about $15 to $20 a month. On the right is the Orbcomm ST2100, and we think of this in a way as our holy grail, because this is for the first time a satellite modem cheap enough to pair with a single camera so that you could transmit images from almost anywhere. All you need is a clear patch of sky, and you can wirelessly send the image from our comms unit to this Orbcomm and to the satellite, and then you're good. So we've been doing this, just testing it here and other places. Essentially, this goes to a geosynchronous satellite that's 36,000 kilometers above the equator. There's one over the Galapagos, over the central, the DRC and Sumatra. And as long as you point that satellite with its internal antenna at the right angle and azimuth, you'll have 100% connectivity. So here's some examples of how to use that. You could put an Explorer 540 sat modem on a high point and then have multiple TrailGuards all linked to that sat modem via LoRa. Or if you're in a really hilly rainforest environment where it's difficult to transmit images, you can use this ST2100 and send images from that cheaper sat modem to the satellite network. Here's some examples of us at work. Here's Piyush Yadav in Jaipur, India, using one of our engineers testing our system. And I'm here with our team in Maryland. That on the right-hand side, where it says Gateway, that's our Mount Everest of Montgomery County, Maryland. That's Mount Sugarloaf. And here we have a TrailGuard camera just taped to a tripod for lack of a third hand. And we're transmitting an image, the image on the left of me, over LoRa to a gateway on top of that mountain. Similarly, Piyush is at a religious shrine that's on a mountain range about 6 kilometers outside of Jaipur. And you can see where the gateway is, but he's taking a picture and it's transmitting to the gateway and then on to the cell network and to the internet. So the system works, and we can be implementing this across the Tiger Range. Now, embedded AI, why it's so vital and why it conserves. The most interesting thing about the AI is that for our purpose, one of its greatest advantages is filtering out all the false positive images on the edge in the camera itself, rather than sending everything to the cloud and running a program there to do so. So the idea is that using AI on the edge, it's like a giant sieve, and you're only sending on the true positives to the headquarters. Here's an example of why you want to use AI on the edge. Here are pictures taken recently from cameras in East Africa. And you can see first the very high p-values of the humans detected. These are not poachers. These are all either cattle herders or conservancy rangers. We don't typically share pictures of poachers with the outside world. But you can see first the accuracy. It's detecting the herder in figure B, but not the cattle. The high p-values. You see the very low p-value in K of a shrub that's somewhat human-like, but and then the cow also detected, but at a very low p-value. So we set our threshold very low at p is 0.2, so as not to run the risk of a false negative, of a poacher going by but not being able to detect it. But the most important point here is that over a 2-month period, there were about 3,300 trigger events. And most of those were false triggers. Only about 38 of them were actually true positives of humans. So in other words, 1 out of every 100 trigger events basically were of humans. Now imagine if you tried to send all of those images, all those false positives, those false triggers onto the internet, either through a sat modem or a GSM network. before you got past the first 100 or 200, you would probably have chewed up the batteries in a traditional camera that has a GSM connection. So think of it this way, is based on our calculations, we think that a single charge of our 3.7 volt battery at a place properly on a trail where you might get about 10 or 15 detections per month based on the data I just showed you of true positives, that battery could last you 3 years in the field. The equivalent in like a high-end Reconyx Hyperfire camera that uses non-rechargeable batteries would take you 8 full replacements at $120 a year. And if you did something like, if you didn't have a monitor that would stop it from sending everything, you would have burned those batteries up in probably a couple of days. So this makes TrailGuard far more efficient for optimizing park assets in that it probably increases, we've calculated the efficiency of rangers by a factor of 5 by shifting patrols from just random patrolling to what we call event-triggered rapid response, where rangers are mostly responding to these TrailGuard alerts, which makes it far more effective. Also, by having pictures of the intruders, that informs rangers, particularly in countries where the poachers are heavily armed, and it improves the safety for park protectors. This gives you a sense of the difference of TrailGuard versus some of the high-end cameras, and how what's featured in TrailGuard is enabled AI, connectivity anywhere through GSM, LoRa, satellite, very low risk of theft because it's so small, and very long battery life, where these other cameras lack AI. Some of them only have cell connectivity and relatively weak. They're prone to theft and vandalism unless they're well hidden because they're placed low down, and they have very short battery life. So now we're going to just give you a sneak peek at a revolutionary camera, what we're building now. The first one that I showed you in this slide on the far left uses the Myriad 2 chip. This new camera uses the Myriad X, the next in the line from Intel, that runs 8 times faster than the Myriad 2. It is able to run multiple neural network models at once. It has all these amazing features in it, including things that we've added at both in the camera and at the server end, and we're just prototyping this now. We like to say that the TrailGuard AI, the previous model here, is the size in green on the left, is the size of your index finger. The TrailGuard AIX is the size of your thumb. It has 3 camera lenses, a 13 megapixel color camera lens, and then the 2 at the left and the right give stereo depth. So you'd be able to calculate measurements on tigers if you took that, or body mass or condition. The thing sticking out is the motion sensor, but basically this is going to be built on an existing camera board furnished to us by one of our partners. So we're already testing this now. Here's Steve Gulick, our inventor and guru, who is being detected here at 99%, and you can see the sharpness of the lens in the daytime, and you can see the AI working again on the right, detecting him walking by. But now for something truly mind-blowing. The TrailGuard AIX is able to see in the dark. What I mean by that is the AI models that we're running are better at detecting objects in near pitch black than the human eye. So if I hadn't said there's a human in the picture on the left where it's labeled person, maybe if you're really good, you might somehow see like some trouser legs at the bottom. But chances are, if you were a ranger sitting at a computer screen and this came in without the bounding box, you would not be able to see the human there. And since a lot of poaching comes at night, we want to make sure that we have very good detection. So what we do then is we extract that region of interest, and then we can run that on our server to enhance the image. And what you see is Steve at the far right. He's in all 3 pictures, but you can only see it in the one on the right where the image is enhanced. So this gives us incredible capability to detect poachers anywhere at any time of the day. We're using this hardware platform to address a number of use cases where you simply just change the program that the AI is running, the computer vision chip, to address these different use cases, from anti-poaching to human-wildlife coexistence, protecting indigenous lands, detecting invasive species, and so on. So we're in contact with leading conservationists in India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka about scaling the technology to protect wildlife across South and Southeast Asia. This is our team. And here are our key tech partners, Intel, Cividia, Galaxy, Inmarsat, Luxonis, and Emnify. And that is the conclusion of my talk. So hopefully there'll be time for questions from the audience, and we'll go from there. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. And back to you, Rich.
Okay, thank you. Yes, now we will entertain questions. And so if you have a question you would like to ask Eric, just go down here to the bottom to the Q&A on the bottom of your screen and type in your question, and I can read those out. Now we had Bruno says, great presentation, Eric. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? I know we've got some people on here who have worked with you and are working on some research projects. Maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about how we're using this with some of our students.
Sure. So we have a plan to work with Tigers United and Clemson in the Kana-Pench corridor. And the idea here is to monitor we know that none of the parks in the Tigers range are large enough to maintain a viable population of tigers. And so we have to be able to manage tigers as metapopulations, as populations linked by dispersal. So that becomes critical in monitoring, are tigers actually using the corridors that exist, or even corridors that in the future might be designed for their passage from one reserve to another. And so those are some of the questions that will be addressed in this research project. How many tigers are moving? How frequently? Are they coming into contact with humans or cattle, livestock herders? How long are they staying in different areas? And the great advantage of doing this in India is there's excellent cell connectivity in these areas between parks. And so we can rely on the 2G or 4G network. And where we don't have that, we can use this GSM range extender technique. And we have Piyush Yadav working there now. So we have our own engineer in India assisting with the project.
Great. Okay, the next question is, are there plans to train the AI on other species?
Yes, in fact, we have AI now for wolves, snow leopards, Asian bears, all 5 species of rhinos, so African, 2 African, 3 Asian, African and Asian elephants, all 36 species of felids. What am I leaving out? We're working on giraffes, on great apes, but essentially we're doing a number of detectors. What we found is that running these on the Myriad X chip, then this new camera will be much more efficient. So we're probably focusing much of the effort on detecting wildlife with the new camera, because it will run faster and be more accurate. But yeah, the sky's the limit in terms of but we also have detectors for invasive species on islands. So cats, rats, mice, and goats for now, which are the 4 major invaders, mammalian invaders to islands where they were not extant, and so or evolved, and so causing great damage, to be able to be like an early alert biomonitoring system.
Okay, thank you. The next question from Vasavi is, I am wondering how the technology is secure in sense of the signals being hacked by poachers.
Well, I don't think that they can easily get access to it. Yeah, I mean, there's always a remote possibility, but also there's also technology where if cell phones are in an area, you can use that cell phone and use the tower to locate where those are who are trying to do that. But yeah, I don't think that's possible easily, and certainly they're never going to find the cameras. I mean, that's usually the bigger concern than hacking into the system is the cameras people put out are so visible to anybody who has sharp eyes that it's not much of a an effective way to address the poaching problem. Better to make things cryptic.
Yes. Okay, this is from Prabina. I hope I said that right, from Nepal. She just came to Clemson this fall, or they did. How long are you working on this in Nepal? And he had never heard of this technique.
So we have not introduced this to Nepal yet. In fact, we haven't brought this to Asia. We've been working in Africa for the last 3 years, because the poaching crisis was so severe there. And that's where, honestly, where our funding was first to work there. But now that we have the opportunity to work with the Indian government, I think that we can rapidly expand to help in India at the tiger sanctuaries. But also, since Nepal is a country very close to my heart, we'll try to work there as soon as we can, as soon as we get up to volume with our cameras. But we've had very strong interest from the different NGOs and government officials already. So it's just a matter of producing enough camera alert systems to get out there.
Which goes as a nice segue into Andre's question about scaling up the use of your tech. What do you see as the underlying drivers for the growth and demand for your product? And conversely, what are the primary risks of failure?
Well, the demand is skyrocketing for it. We haven't really publicized this too much, although there have been features like Robert Downey Jr.'s Age of AI series that featured TrailGuard and some promotions from Intel and others. But we've been waiting until we have what's called a minimum viable product, and we have that now, and we're into manufacture of the cameras, and we are rapidly prototyping the new camera that I showed. So we have been sending them out to a number of parks in Africa, and that's where I'll be working for the next few months. But we suspect by January we'll be starting to make some shipments to selected parks in Asia. And Nepal will definitely be at the top of the list.
Okay, this is from Faith. Do you think it's possible that poachers will be able to adapt to the use of this technology somehow, like wearing disguises or detecting the cameras with their own technology?
It's pretty hard to do that. I think that, for one thing, the cameras are placed, if people place them right, they can be higher in the trees. Typically, if poachers are coming at night into areas, then they're out looking straight ahead for the lions, the elephants, the black mambas in Africa and Cape Buffalo to stay out of harm's way. They're not looking up in the trees or to the side of them where the cameras would be placed, and they don't have that kind of peripheral vision. Also, the IR illuminator that we use is above the threshold of human, the wavelength that it's at is above human detection pretty much, and so they're very hard to see. I don't think the poachers will be able to detect them. The other thing is to make these cheap enough so that you can put lots of cameras out there. And also, if a poacher detects one, it's like finding a needle in a haystack. They're not going to find a lot of them. And we can also move cameras around too. That's the other beauty of the system. It's very portable. So if it's placed on a poaching trail, an active trail, but then that trail goes cold after a while because poachers have been caught, or the animals they're trying to poach have shifted and they move for the season, you can move the cameras. So it becomes a mobile system.
Are there any political barriers within countries that cause problems for this work?
I don't think so. The only ones that might occur, places where you need satellite modems, and depending on the regulations of the country, if we can use the technology that we have, particularly the Inmarsat sat modems, and that we're investigating now. But we haven't run into any yet that's precluded the use. I think that, you know, once we start advertising, we will have just a tremendous outpouring of interest. We already have it. We have over, I don't know, 130 groups that want to get access to the technology, that we just, you know, have to first support the groups that we've been working with for the last 2 years who have been waiting patiently for this. And then we'll get to people as soon as we can. But we think it will scale very quickly now that it's going to be in manufacture.
Okay, well, that is all of the questions that we have from our participants. I will turn it over to Brett for bringing us out.
Thanks, Rochelle, and thank you, Eric. That was absolutely terrific. Very exciting with this new technology coming on, and I was very excited about I don't even want to call it the old stuff. It's revolutionary, and all the questions. There's a lot of need there, and you guys are really going a long ways to fill that need. So, Eric, thank you very much, and we wish everybody well. We'll see you at the next session of the Road to Vladivostok in November. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.